She stood at the altar in her designer wedding gown, smiling for the cameras, completely unaware that the man she had humiliated and left for dead was about to walk through those church doors. The guests would gasp. The groom would freeze. And she would finally understand that some ghosts don't stay buried. This is the story of Isabella Crawford, a woman who learned too late that cruelty has a way of coming back to haunt you. It was supposed to be the wedding of the year. June 14th, 2023. St. Michael's Cathedral in downtown Boston was decorated with white roses and golden ribbons. 300 guests filled the pews, their phones ready to capture every moment of what society magazines were calling the union of the decade. Isabella Crawford, daughter of real estate mogul Richard Crawford, was marrying Daniel Montgomery, the young CEO whose tech company had just gone public. Everything was perfect. The champagne was chilled, the orchestra was tuning their instruments, the bride was radiant. But outside rain began to fall, and with it came a truth that would shatter everything, because sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and on that day, it chose to collect a debt that had been 7 years in the making. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened on that wedding day, we need to go back 7 years to the summer of 2016. Isabella Crawford was 20 years old, home from her junior year at Yale, spending her break at her family's estate in Cape Cod. She was beautiful, ambitious, and completely aware of her place in the world. Her father owned half the commercial real estate in Massachusetts. Her mother sat on the boards of 3 museums. Isabella had been raised to believe that success was her birthright and that people were divided into 2 categories, those who mattered and those who didn't. That summer, her BMW broke down on a country road 15 miles from the estate. No cell service, no passing cars, just heat and frustration. Then a pickup truck pulled over. The driver was a young man about her age, wearing oil-stained work clothes and a Red Sox cap. His name was Liam Parker. He worked at his father's auto repair shop in town. He was kind, soft-spoken, and he fixed her car right there on the side of the road, refusing to take any payment. Isabella thanked him quickly and drove away, not giving him another thought. But Liam couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed again. At the local diner where she stopped for coffee, at the beach where he worked part-time as a lifeguard, at the farmer's market where his mother sold vegetables. Each time he found a reason to talk to her. And slowly, against every instinct she'd been raised with, Isabella found herself falling for him. They started meeting in secret. Late-night walks on the beach, conversations that lasted until sunrise. He told her about his dreams of becoming an engineer, of building things that mattered. She told him about the pressure she felt, the expectations that suffocated her. For the first time in her life, Isabella felt like someone saw her as more than just a Crawford. Liam saw her as just Isabella, a girl who laughed at his jokes and didn't care that his truck was older than he was. By August, they were in love. Real love. The kind that makes you believe the world can change for you. But the world doesn't change for people like Isabella Crawford. It expects them to change for it. When her parents discovered the relationship, the response was immediate and brutal. Her father called Liam's family's repair shop and threatened to destroy their business unless Liam stayed away from Isabella. Her mother arranged for Isabella to spend the rest of the summer in Europe with relatives. But before she left, Isabella made Liam a promise. She told him that after she graduated, after she had access to her own trust fund, they would be together. She asked him to wait for her, and Liam, because he loved her, said yes. He went back to his life, working double shifts at the repair shop and taking night classes at community college. He saved every dollar he could, planning for their future. He wrote her letters that she rarely answered. He called her phone and got voicemail. But he held on to that promise because it was all he had. 2 years passed this way. 2 years of Liam building a life for them, while Isabella's silence grew longer. Then in December of 2018, Liam saw an announcement in the society pages of the Boston Globe. Isabella Crawford was engaged to Daniel Montgomery. The wedding was scheduled for the following summer. Liam read that announcement 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Then he drove 4 hours to New Haven, where Isabella was finishing her senior year at Yale. He waited outside her apartment for 6 hours in the freezing cold until she came home. When she saw him standing there, her face didn't show love or guilt or even surprise. It showed annoyance, like he was a stain on her expensive coat. She told him to leave. He asked her about their promise. She laughed, a cold sound that cut through him worse than the December wind. She said she'd been young and stupid that summer, that she'd never seriously considered a future with someone like him, that he should have known better than to believe someone of her background would throw away her life for a mechanic's son. Those were her exact words, a mechanic's son, to complain about safety violations. That night, Liam was assigned to clean out one of the chemical storage units. The supervisor who gave him the assignment was new, someone who'd been hired just 2 weeks earlier. He handed Liam a respirator mask and told him to be quick about it. Liam went into the unit at 11:45 p.m. At 12:17 a.m., according to the official report, a spark from faulty wiring ignited chemical fumes. The resulting explosion and fire killed Liam Parker instantly. At least, that's what the official report said. The factory paid out a settlement to Liam's parents. $50,000 and a confidentiality agreement. The supervisor who'd assigned Liam to that unit quit the next day and moved out of state. The local fire marshal ruled it an accidental death caused by inadequate safety protocols. The case was closed within 3 weeks. Liam's funeral was held on a rainy Tuesday morning. 47 people attended. Isabella Crawford was not one of them. She was in Paris, choosing flowers for her wedding, according to plan. At 3 p.m., the guests began arriving at St. Michael's Cathedral. By 4:30, everyone was seated. The orchestra was playing Pachelbel's Canon. The flower girls were lined up. Daniel stood at the altar in his custom tuxedo, smiling. At 4:45, Isabella began her walk down the aisle on her father's arm. Cameras flashed. People whispered about how beautiful she looked. She felt like a queen. The ceremony proceeded without incident. They exchanged vows. They exchanged rings. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. They kissed as everyone applauded. Everything was perfect. Then they moved to the reception hall next door, a space that had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, a 12-piece orchestra, tables decorated with arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Dinner was served at 6:30. Champagne flowed, toasts were made. Isabella's father talked about how proud he was of his daughter. Daniel's best man told embarrassing stories that made everyone laugh. Isabella felt euphoric, invincible, like nothing could touch her. Then at 7:45, right before the cake cutting, one of the waiters brought a small envelope to Isabella's table. It was addressed to her in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it, expecting maybe a congratulatory note from a guest who'd already left. Inside was a single sentence written on plain white paper. "Some promises are kept even after death." Isabella's hand trembled. She looked around the room, trying to figure out who would send such a thing. Was it a joke? A threat? She showed it to Daniel. He frowned, told her it was probably nothing, some weird prank from one of their college friends. But Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy. Her skin prickled with inexplicable anxiety. At 8 p.m., the lights in the reception hall dimmed for the first dance. The orchestra began playing "The Way You Look Tonight." Daniel took Isabella's hand and led her to the dance floor. As they swayed to the music, Isabella tried to focus on the moment, on her husband's arms around her, on the fairy tale she'd created. But she couldn't stop thinking about that note. Then, right in the middle of their dance, the orchestra stopped playing. The lights came back up suddenly, harshly. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Isabella and Daniel stopped dancing and looked toward the entrance. The massive oak doors of the reception hall had been opened. Rain was pouring outside, visible through the doorway, and standing in that doorway, soaking wet, was a young man in clothes that looked like they'd been pulled from a donation bin. His hair was plastered to his face. His eyes were fixed on Isabella, and he looked exactly like Liam Parker. Every person in that room turned to stare. The silence was absolute. Isabella felt her knees buckle. Daniel caught her arm, asking her what was wrong, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe, because she was staring at a ghost. The young man didn't move from the doorway. He just stood there, water dripping from his clothes onto the polished marble floor, his gaze locked on Isabella. Finally, Daniel stepped forward, his voice sharp with authority. "Who are you? This is a private event. You need to leave." The young man's voice, when he spoke, was quiet but clear enough for everyone in the silent room to hear. "My name is Ethan Parker. I came here because I have something that belongs to this wedding." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Even from across the room, Isabella recognized it. It was Liam's journal, the one he'd always carried with him that summer 7 years ago. Ethan walked into the room, and guests instinctively moved aside, creating a path straight to the bride and groom. Daniel moved to intercept him, but Ethan held up a hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Mr. Montgomery. I'm here because of your father." That got everyone's attention. Whispers started immediately. Daniel's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Ethan said. His voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Because 7 years ago, my brother Liam Parker died in a fire at your father's factory, and I've spent the last 6 months proving it wasn't an accident." The room erupted. Guests pulled out their phones. People started talking over each other. Isabella grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself, her mind reeling. Brother? Liam had a brother? Daniel's jaw clenched. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're making false accusations. My father's company was cleared of any wrongdoing." "Because he paid off the fire marshal," Ethan said. He opened the journal and pulled out several folded documents. "I've got the bank records. I've got witness statements from 3 other factory workers who were told to keep quiet. And I've got text messages between your father's head of security and the supervisor who assigned my brother to that unit the night he died." He held up the papers. "Your father knew that storage unit had faulty wiring. He'd been warned about it twice, but fixing it would have meant shutting down production for 3 days, so he didn't fix it. And when my brother was assigned to clean it out, it wasn't random. It was planned." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Isabella looked at Daniel, waiting for him to deny it, to call security, to do something. But Daniel just stood there, and in his silence, she saw the truth. "That's not all," Ethan continued. He turned to look directly at Isabella. "My brother was in love with you. He wrote about you every day in this journal, about the summer you spent together, about the promise you made him, about how he waited for you even after you got engaged to someone else." Isabella's face burned with shame as 300 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her. "When he found out you were getting married, it broke something in him. He took that job at Montgomery Industrial because he needed money and because I think he wanted to feel close to your world somehow. He was there the night of the fire because he'd volunteered for a double shift. He was trying to save enough money to start over somewhere new, somewhere he wouldn't have to see your engagement photos in every society magazine." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "The supervisor who assigned him to that unit? He was hired 2 weeks before the fire. He had no prior experience in industrial safety, and he got a $50,000 cash payment the day after my brother died." Daniel finally found his voice. "This is insane. You can't prove any of this." "I already have," Ethan said. "I gave copies of everything to the FBI 3 days ago. They're opening an investigation into your father's company, and I came here tonight because I wanted her," he pointed at Isabella, "to know what her cruelty cost." The words hit Isabella like physical blows. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What could she possibly say? That she was sorry? That she'd been young and stupid? That she'd never meant for anyone to get hurt? None of it would matter. None of it would bring Liam back. Ethan turned to leave, but Isabella found her voice. "Wait." He stopped, but didn't turn around. How do you even exist? Liam never mentioned having a brother." "That's because he didn't know about me until it was too late," Ethan said, finally turning back to face her. "We were twins, separated at birth. I was adopted by a family in Chicago. I only found out about Liam 2 years ago when my adoptive parents died and I started looking into my birth records. By the time I tracked him down, he'd been dead for 3 years. He held up the journal. "I found this in a second-hand bookstore in Providence. Someone must have bought it after his parents' estate sale. When I read it, when I learned what happened to him, I knew I had to find out the truth, and I did. The fire that killed my brother wasn't an accident. It was negligence at best and murder at worst, and both of you," he looked between Isabella and Daniel, "both of you played a part in destroying him." The wedding reception dissolved into chaos. Guests were talking over each other, calling their lawyers, recording everything on their phones. Daniel's family huddled together, their faces grim. Isabella's father was already on his phone, probably calling his attorney. Daniel grabbed Isabella's arm, his voice low and angry. "Did you know about this? About him?" "No," Isabella whispered. "I swear I didn't know. He never told me he had a brother." "But the rest of it? You were with him? You made him promises?" Isabella pulled her arm free. "It was 7 years ago, Daniel. It was nothing. It didn't mean anything." "It meant something to him," Daniel shot back. "And now my father's company is under federal investigation because of it." "Because of your father's choices," Isabella said, feeling a spark of anger cut through her shock. "Don't you dare blame this on me. I didn't force your father to ignore safety violations. I didn't force him to cover up what happened." They stared at each other, and in that moment, Isabella saw their future crumbling. This wasn't a marriage, it was a merger, and mergers could be dissolved when they became liabilities. Security finally escorted Ethan out of the building, but the damage was done. Within an hour, the story was all over social media. Hashtags were trending. Think pieces were being written. The golden couple's perfect wedding had turned into a public scandal. By midnight, half the guests had left. By 1 a.m., Daniel's father had been taken in for questioning by federal agents. By 2 a.m., Isabella was back in her hotel room, still wearing her $40,000 wedding dress, watching her perfect life implode on every news channel. She wanted to cry, but couldn't. She wanted to feel angry, but only felt numb. She kept thinking about Liam, about that summer 7 years ago when they would lie on the beach and talk about the future, about the look on his face the night he'd come to New Haven, the hope dying in his eyes as she told him he'd never really mattered, about the fact that he'd died in a fire at her husband's father's factory while she was in Paris choosing flowers for her wedding. How do you come back from something like that? How do you live with yourself when you realize your cruelty, your pride, your selfishness helped destroy someone who loved you? The FBI's investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, they'd uncovered a pattern of safety violations at Montgomery Industrial Fabrication going back 15 years. They found evidence of payoffs to inspectors, threats made to workers who complained, and a company culture that prioritized profit over human life. Daniel's father, Thomas Montgomery, was indicted on multiple charges including negligent homicide, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The supervisor who'd assigned Liam to the storage unit that night was tracked down in Arizona and agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. He confirmed that he'd been hired specifically to assign certain workers to dangerous tasks, workers who'd made complaints or who were seen as potential problems. Liam Parker hadn't made any complaints, but Thomas Montgomery had learned about Liam's connection to Isabella, and in the twisted logic of a man who saw people as assets or liabilities, Liam had become a liability. The fire had been set up to look like an accident, but it was murder by negligence, a calculated decision that a young man's life was worth less than 3 days of lost production. The media coverage was relentless. Every detail of Isabella and Liam's relationship was dissected. Old photos surfaced of them together that summer, taken by tourists at the beach or by friends at local spots. People who'd known Liam came forward with stories about how heartbroken he'd been, how he'd never stopped hoping Isabella would come back to him. Isabella became the villain of the story, the rich girl who'd toyed with a poor boy's feelings and then discarded him when he was no longer convenient. She received death threats. Her social media was flooded with hateful comments. Someone spray-painted murderer on the gates of her family's estate. She couldn't leave her apartment without being swarmed by cameras and reporters shouting questions. How did it feel to know her rejection had led to Liam's death? Did she feel any guilt? Would she apologize to his family? She never answered. What could she say that would matter? Daniel filed for annulment 3 weeks after the wedding. His lawyers cited fraud, claiming Isabella had failed to disclose the relationship with Liam. It was a flimsy legal argument, but Daniel's family had the best lawyers money could buy. The annulment was granted within 2 months. Isabella's father, trying to salvage the family's reputation, issued a public statement expressing sympathy for the Parker family and announcing a $1 million donation to workplace safety organizations. It was a meaningless gesture, blood money that changed nothing. 6 months after the wedding, on a cold December morning, Isabella drove to the cemetery where Liam Parker was buried. She'd been there 3 times before, always turning back before reaching his grave. This time she made herself walk the full distance. His headstone was simple. Liam James Parker, 1996-2019, beloved son and brother. Someone had left fresh flowers, probably his parents who came every Sunday. Isabella knelt in the wet grass, not caring that her expensive coat was getting muddy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words felt inadequate, microscopic compared to what she'd done. "I'm so sorry, Liam. You deserved better. You deserved everything, and I was too selfish and stupid and afraid to see it." She stayed there for an hour, talking to him like she should have talked to him that night in New Haven, telling him what she should have told him back then, that she'd loved him too, that she'd been terrified of that love, that choosing her family's approval over him had been the worst mistake of her life. When she finally stood up to leave, she saw Ethan standing about 50 feet away, watching her. He must have followed her from the parking lot. They looked at each other across the winter grass, 2 people connected by the ghost between them. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He nodded, just once. It wasn't forgiveness, but maybe it was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that she was finally facing what she'd done, that she was trying, even if it was too late, to be better than she'd been. Isabella didn't go back to her old life. She couldn't. That person, the one who'd valued status over substance and pride over people, was someone she could no longer recognize in the mirror. She quit her job at her father's company. She moved out of her expensive apartment. She volunteered at organizations that helped working-class families navigate the legal system after workplace accidents. She testified at Thomas Montgomery's trial, telling the truth about her relationship with Liam, about how his father might have seen Liam as a threat. Thomas Montgomery was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The company was fined $30 million and forced to implement comprehensive safety reforms. Liam's parents received a settlement of $5 million, though no amount of money could replace their son. Isabella reached out to them through their lawyer, offering to meet if they wanted to, telling them she would understand if they refused. They refused. She didn't blame them. Some wounds don't heal. Some mistakes don't get forgiven. You just have to live with them and try to be someone who wouldn't make them again. A year after the wedding, Isabella ran into Ethan at a coffee shop in Cambridge. He was a graduate student at MIT, studying mechanical engineering, the same field Liam had dreamed of entering. They talked for 2 hours. He told her about discovering he had a twin brother, about reading Liam's journal and feeling like he'd lost someone he'd never had the chance to know. She told him about trying to become a better person, about working with families who'd lost loved ones to corporate negligence. Before they parted, Ethan said something that Isabella would remember for the rest of her life. My brother loved you, and I think that love was real, even if you couldn't see it at the time. Maybe the best way to honor it is to make sure other people don't make the same mistakes you did. 3 years have passed since that rainy June day when a ghost walked into Isabella Crawford's wedding reception. Thomas Montgomery is in federal prison. Daniel Montgomery sold his stake in his father's company and moved to California. Isabella works for a nonprofit that advocates for workplace safety legislation. She's not rich anymore, not in the way she used to be, but she's honest. She's kind. She's useful. And she carries Liam's memory with her every day, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what happens when we treat people as disposable, when we let fear and pride make our choices for us. Ethan Parker graduated from MIT and now designs safety systems for industrial facilities. He never knew his brother in life, but through Liam's journal and through seeking justice for him, he found a purpose. Sometimes people ask Isabella if she regrets that day, if she wishes she'd never gotten engaged to Daniel, never had that wedding. She always gives the same answer. She regrets every cruel thing she said to Liam, every moment she let her family's expectations override her own heart. But she doesn't regret the wedding falling apart, because it forced her to see who she'd become, and it gave her a chance to become someone else. So here's what I want you to think about. Have you ever treated someone as less than they deserved because of what they had or didn't have? Have you ever let fear or pride or other people's opinions stop you from being honest about what you really wanted? Have you ever realized too late that you hurt someone who didn't deserve it? Isabella Crawford thought she had everything figured out. She thought she knew what mattered, what success looked like, what kind of person was worth loving. And by the time she realized she was wrong, the person she'd wronged was dead. Most of us don't get dramatic wake-up calls like a ghost appearing at our wedding. Most of us make our mistakes quietly, hurt people privately, and convince ourselves it doesn't really matter. But it does matter. Every cruelty matters. Every time we treat someone as disposable, every time we value status over humanity, every time we break a promise because keeping it became inconvenient, it matters. We like to think we're good people who occasionally make mistakes. But maybe we're just people who have to choose every single day whether to be good or not. And maybe the measure of our lives isn't what we achieve or accumulate, but how we treat the people who can't do anything for us, the people who love us simply because of who we are, not because of what we have. Liam Parker died in a fire 7 years ago, but his story didn't end there. It changed lives. It brought justice. It taught lessons to people who needed to learn them. And maybe that's the only redemption available for some tragedies, the kind where we can't fix what's broken, but we can learn from it. We can be better because of it. What do you think? Could you forgive someone like Isabella? Could you understand her? Could you see yourself in her mistakes? Let me know in the comments. And if this story made you think about someone you need to make things right with, maybe today's the day to do it. Before it's too late. Before they're gone and all you have left are regrets and what-ifs. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want more stories that make you think. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, we're all just one choice away from being the villain in someone else's story. Choose better.